Hello everyone, and welcome to NeoSystems webinar today. GovCon Accounting 101, this is the second in our series, Contract Types and Pricing. Looking at our agenda, we're going to have a brief interview about NeoSystems so you can understand a little bit about us. And then we're going to get right into the contract types. We're going to explore each type, its risks, the benefits or advantage of each type for you, as well as some of NeoSystems tips on how to manage these contract types effectively. Then we'll discuss the best practices for pricing your proposals for each type. One, to maximize your probability of winning while ensuring you can deliver them profitably. All, of course, while staying in compliance. Then we'll open it up to your questions. And if at any time you have any questions during the webinar, please be sure to type them into the questions box. At NeoSystems, we're proud to say, grow ahead, we've got your back office. At NeoSystems, we provide strategic back office services. These include accounting, HR, and IT. Including accounting, we provide the accounting services for many, many government contractors. We also do projects for accounting. These could include incurred cost submissions, pricing proposals, contract support. We also do system reviews to make sure that your system is DCAA compliant. With me today, we have Sean Chan. Sean is our Vice President of Client Services. He has over 18 years of experience in accounting and financial management roles, specifically with government contractors. He also is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day accounting operations for our clients. I'm Brian Giblin. I'm a product manager here at NeoSystems, and I take the opportunity to get out and talk to clients, non-clients, find out the business challenges that they're facing to make sure that we have the correct product and service offerings that will meet your needs. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that NeoSystems today has over 500 companies representing 32,000 employees in our secure private cloud. In this cloud, we host several Deltek applications, including CostPoint, GCS, time and expense, as well as other applications. Right now, I want to do a poll, get to know you guys just a little bit better before we get into Sean's presentation. Let me ask, what is your experience with cost-plus contracts? Cost-plus contracts can be have some of the strictest requirements from DCAA, and this will give us a gauge of the level of experience this audience has. Are you currently managing cost-plus contracts? You've been there, done that, you've taken them through completion? Or you've started to manage some but haven't done any closeouts just yet? Or are you in the process of bidding on some cost-plus contracts? Choice D, you're looking to bid some cost-plus contracts in the near future, and that's probably part of why you're on this call. Others of you might not be pursuing cost-plus contracts, and that would be interesting for us to get some insight into why. Okay, going to start getting ready to close out the poll. Okay, with that, I'm going to close the poll, and let's have a look at our results. Makes a lot of sense. I see some of you are, the most popular answer, about a third of you said you're looking to bid on cost-plus contracts in the near future. I can understand why you'd be on this call then. And then the second most popular answer is you're currently managing and you've done it all the way through completion. Well, I'm sure even you will find that Sean has a few tips and insights that will be of great benefit to you today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean Chan. Sean?
Hi, thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. We'll go ahead and get started here. So the contract types that we are going to be discussing today are firm fixed price, cost plus award fee, and cost plus fixed fee, and time and materials. Obviously, there are more contract types, but for webinar purposes, this is what we're going to be going through. So here in this graph, you'll be able to see that from a contractor's perspective, what is a high risk and what is a low risk to you as a company. And starting on the left side, fixed price contracts are potentially a higher risk and higher reward type contract for contractors. Reason why it's a high risk is because you could theoretically underbid the fixed price job in a proposal and thinking that you as a company with the scope of work that's in the RFP could complete it within a certain amount of funding, and 60–70% through the job you realize that there are going to be needed more hours and dollars expended to complete the job. So therefore that's a high risk on the contractor side, and we'll get into where it could be a low risk or high reward on the contractor side a little bit later in the presentation. And then on the right-hand side for cost plus fixed fee and cost plus award fee, it's really a low risk for the contractor, mainly because you're always going to recover your costs, your direct costs and your indirect costs as far as fringe, overhead, and G&A. So you always recover those by billing the government. So that's why it's really a low-risk type of work for contractors. Now, keep in mind, even though cost plus fixed fee and cost plus award fee or any kind of cost reimbursable type contract is a low risk, keep in mind that your profit potential is very minimum in these type of contracts. So the next few slides are a bit mundane, and hopefully you all can stick with us as we get through the definitions of the contracts, and then after the different types of contracts, we'll get into some pricing strategies here. So the first contract that we'll talk about are the firm fixed price contracts, and they are really awarded when there's a definite performance specification and the scope of work is clearly defined. And it's also given when the government can really theoretically pinpoint a set price for the work that needs to be done. And the definition is found in the FAR 16.202-2. So again, on the fixed price contracts, the maximum profit potential for fixed price jobs can really escalate depending on the amount of effort needed to complete the work. So if you submit in the RFP $1 million that it'll take to complete the work, and you finish the job only expending $700,000, that's where fixed price can really be beneficial to you as a company from a profit perspective. At the same time, in the previous slide, you'll see that it's also a high risk because you could potentially underbid it. So firm fixed price jobs gives really the company an incentive to control costs, both from a direct and indirect perspective, and in doing so, where you're able to control the costs, you'll be able to also improve the profits within the contract, and obviously deliver your deliverables on time to ensure that your costs are controlled and your profits are increased on what you bid. And pricing is typically less complex for firm fixed price jobs. So some of the risks associated with firm fixed price are that obviously the contractor assumes full cost responsibility when being awarded a firm fixed price job. So they are responsible for the labor and materials associated with it. And nowadays, I'm sure you're experiencing that a lot of the RFPs that are coming out are low cost, technically acceptable type jobs. So that even kind of further really ties you down, because you need to make sure that in order to win the work, you have to have low price. Well, in order to have low price, then your indirect rates need to be low, and now it becomes even more difficult to perform the work and deliver on that particular award price, because you know that, okay, you're squeezing really your profit margin. So the firm fixed price best practices when you're bidding the RFP, know the impacts of all the contract requirements and specifications within the RFP. Be exactly sure that the work that you are bidding on can be completed for the proposed hours and costs. And really, this last bullet, prevent any subcontractor overrun, is really important. Sometimes, as a prime, you might have a smaller size subcontractor that really only deals with, let's say, T&M. And a lot of times, if the subcontractor is given a T&M contract under your prime contract, they could really kind of eat into your profit margin or your funding. So make sure that when you are managing this particular type of contract, that there isn't really any subcontractor overrun. Next contract we'll get into are T&M, time and material type contracts, and they are suitable for use when the government cannot accurately estimate the extent of the work, the duration of the work, or really anticipate costs with any degree of confidence. Again, the T&M definition can be found in the FAR 16.601. So the risks for time and material, even though your profit based on a particular bill rate is usually greater than fixed price and obviously greater than cost plus fixed fee, but there are some risks and advantages to time and materials. So some of the risks are that the wide salary variations within a labor category that you're bidding can come into play, meaning that you can't really foresee the future. So if you bid on an existing employee that you have within the company and you build up their particular rate, and let's say their bill rate to the government is $100 an hour and their salary is $80,000, you already know pretty much what you're always going to expect from a profit percentage each time you bill the government. So if that employee leaves and you're not able to find the same salary for that particular employee under that labor category that you bid, you might find an employee that's $100,000 in salary but still being bid at that particular same bill rate to the government. Well, that's that variation, and that's that contract risk that you take when going after a T&M contract. So obviously, internal rate changes can increase the labor costs. If you didn't factor in salary escalations or an escalation factor in your proposal, that could obviously eat into profit over time. And since the government awards a time and material job with really no idea on how long the contract will take or what type of resources it'll need, sometimes it can be difficult to staff projects and added extra resources within this job because you have to do the recruiting and you have to figure out which bill rate that they're going to fall under. So these are some of the risks for T&M. And under the advantages and some of the tips for proposing on T&M contracts is propose higher than normal rates. Use a salary type calculator or trend. There's plenty of websites that give you percentile on the salaries depending on your demographic, and try to keep a higher salary associated with a particular labor category, especially for your key personnel, and ensure that your forward pricing or your provisional rates cover the average of future costs, including reasonable profit, meaning that when you are estimating out the potential FTEs you'll have on board within your company, do some estimating, do some forecasting out so that you're looking at how the company will look from a financial perspective once these employees come on board. And if the hours are limited in the RFP, limit the total number of hours of labor categories combined and not by the labor category, because that could potentially tie your hands behind your back with a contract if you limit hours by labor category. So next one we'll get into are cost plus fixed fee and cost plus award fee type contracts. They are used only when uncertainty is involved in the whole contract, and the government really just has no idea at all on how much it'll take. It's really a high risk for the government to offer these type of contracts. Again, the allowable profit margin is really limited to 2 to 8%. If the RFP says the fee ceiling is at 8%, chances are that the winning company or contractor, they've pretty much bid maybe 6, 5.5, 6, maybe 7%. Very rarely will they always go up to the ceiling on the fee. So the cost plus fixed fee benefits, obviously you get to recoup all of your allowable direct and indirect costs. And there are some flexibility when estimating out your costs. Each year you're able to basically submit your provisional rates, which you could use for that particular, for that upcoming year as burdens for your direct costs. Some of the risks, and there are a lot of risks associated with cost plus fixed fee jobs, is, cost plus fixed fee and cost reimbursable type jobs are really suited for government contractors that have a handle on contract compliance, DCA compliance, and have a handle on their indirect rates. Because one of the criteria in a cost plus environment in the RFP is, I'm sure you all have come across this, where there's a question asking, do you have an approved accounting system? I mean, that's one of the first items that you'll, quote unquote, need to really go after consistently cost plus type work. So the risks are the government's not obligated to reimburse your costs if they go in excess of estimates. So let's take provisional rates, for example. If you develop provisional rates for the upcoming year, and I'll just use fringe as an example, where you bid 30% fringe, and let's say you end the year at 40% fringe. Well, you could theoretically go back to the government and ask for that difference of 10%, saying, I bid 30%, or I said that, my company is going to bill you for 30% fringe. We actually ended the year at 40% fringe, so you could theoretically go back to the government and bill them the difference. In most cases, the government will go ahead and pay that, but if it's considerably more than what you bid, the government really looks down upon that, and you'll be really more scrutinized than you need to be. So one of the main items from a financial perspective for cost plus fixed fee is to really monitor and manage your indirect rates and your costs. If you have any cost estimate changes and if the company needs to make a significant investment within the company, notify your contracting officer of any type of change like that, so that way they're aware. Obviously, once you have been awarded a cost plus type or cost reimbursable type job, you're subject to DCA audit. again, a system audit, which they'll go through your accounting system to deem if you're adequate or inadequate to do business with the government. And then they also audit your actual financials to make sure that the provisional rates that you've supplied to the government are in line with your actual financials. And what that is called an incurred cost submission, which I'm sure a lot of you are going through right now since they're due on June 30th. And again, you must ensure that your costs and billings are in line with your estimates.
Sean, I was wondering, you mentioned a little bit about going over the costs, but I know you've shared with me some situations where people have underrun their costs.
Right.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Go back to another risk, what Brian was talking about is that if you underrun your rates, again, we'll take the fringe example where you bid 30% fringe and you underrun the fringe by 10%, so you really ended the year at 20%. Well, now you actually owe the government back money. That's actually a big risk, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Brian, because that really does happen. Now, there's obviously different strategies that you can take year upon year to ensure that if you do underrun a contract and in the previous years you've overrun it, but you've never billed the government back that particular difference, there are certain strategies that you can take, but that's usually a big risk. And again, it comes back to really monitoring and controlling your internal costs. I mean, one, that's obviously great from a financial perspective because you're able to lock down on the cost coming in and going out of the company so that you can ensure that you're pretty close to what you propose. That's one of the actually the good pluses about a cost-plus type contract is that it forces your hand to really control all of your indirect costs. So some of the best practices for cost-plus or cost reimbursable type work, again, watch your contract costs and funding very closely, especially the contract side of things. We already talked about notifying your contracting officer if you need funding or if there's any kind of type of change within your rate structure. Work off of provisional rates and adjust your provisional rates each year. We'll get into provisional rates a little bit later. And notify your contracting officer and PCA of any changes to your rate structures. And most importantly, on bidding our cost reimbursable type work is no fee on top of fee. So we'll go back to subcontractor costs here. So if you do have subs on your job within your team on the RFP, the subs are going to obviously put in their costs, their indirect costs build up as well, and they're going to put a fee on top of their costs. I've seen some companies where in their estimating practices and provisional rates or pricing under their RFP, they'll actually add their fee on top of those sub costs. And keep in mind that the government will look at that. If they look at that and they see that fees on top of fee, they'll basically reject your RFP submittal. And also, if you're doing that and they don't catch you and you've already been awarded a cost-plus type contract and you're billing the government fee on top of fee, well, that can come back and obviously bite you when PCA comes in and does incur cost audit. So I'm going to kind of go through the cost-plus award fee contracts rather quickly. It's a lot of the same information as a cost-plus 6B. Again, it's the same type of definition. The profit is limited to 2 to 8%. And the only difference is that there's an award fee associated with this type of contract. And an award fee can be quarterly, semi-annually or annually. And it's really up to the sole discretion of the contracting officer. And again, the award fee can be earned in whole or in part during that particular contract period of performance. Again, the same type of definitions and structure really apply to the cost plus award fee. You're able to recover all of your allowable direct and indirect costs. So on similar to the risks for a cost plus fixed fee job, there are obviously risks for the award fee. If your performance as a contractor is unsatisfactory or just marginally satisfactory, then again the contracting officer could give you actually no award fee. The award fee determination and the amount of it is really made by the discretion of the contracting officer, and you cannot appeal it. Again, this cost reimbursable type work is subject to DCA audit, system, and incurred cost audit.
I got to do the shameless plug here. Sean, if people have challenges with their incurred cost submissions, these are services that NEO provides. So if you have questions about an incurred cost submission, we're happy to answer them. If you need help with it, it's actually something if you want to hire us to do, we'd be happy to help with.
Right, that is a bit shameless. All right.
Sorry.
Okay, so some of the best practices is, obviously maintain satisfactory performance throughout the contract, communicate with the contracting officers, see where areas need improvement, what's working, what's not working, and that constant communication obviously it could benefit you in that you could be awarded an early award fee. Same thing applies, some of these bullets for the cost plus fixed fee. Watch contract costs and funding closely, notify your contracting officer, work off provisional rates, and notify the appropriate agencies for changes to your rate structures or policies and procedures. All right, so now that we got through the different contracting types, now we're going to dive into the pricing principles and obviously why we price. So the goals are to increase cash flow, obviously, increase profits. The more RFPs that you're able to be awarded will obviously grow your company and give you the past performance that you need to go after more work, and it also gives you market share. So some of the characteristics of pricing is have a clear identification of the tasks at hand that you're going after. Have broad participation in your pricing preparation. So have as many people as possible participate in completing the cost volume and completing the pricing. Make sure that the data that you have to complete the pricing and the cost volume is valid and accurate. So obviously the accounting data that you're able to run through reports has to be accurate. Have a standardized structure for estimating. If you use your provisional rate / budget, that's a good structure. One of the first things that DCA will ask if they want to review your RFP will be your how did you come up with these rates? And if you have a standardized structure or an estimating practice, then you can provide that to DCA. And always understand which costs are excluded as far as unallowable and how you burden those particular costs when you price. So the sources for pricing, segmented them into primary and secondary. Obviously, the primary are most important, so those include your accounting records, your job cost reports, if you have job cost reports, historical databases, trends, labor distribution reports, indirect cost reports, contract briefs from previous jobs, your contract backlog, and obviously subject matter experts and recruiting are really your primary sources. And you'll see that under the secondary sources, there are overlapping types of data points, but then also having some focus groups in their research papers. Competitor intel is actually very important. If you're able to get that data, usually if you're going after an RFP, there's going to be an incumbent. Most companies have some dealings with the incumbent before going after the RFP, just by communication or knowing someone within the source selectors. You'll be able to kind of gather as far as how much, I don't know, a particular bill rate is or what their wrap rate is, that type of thing. So any type of intel when going after an RFP is a big advantage. So some of the major risks in pricing come up from the lack of understanding in an RFP. Cost volumes can be wordy at times. So not only do you have to fill out the cost volume, but you also have to complete the actual pricing matrix that the government usually provides. So understanding the requirements, reading through the cost volume, looking at the pricing matrix before even diving into that is key. Different interpretation of language, haste, and deception. I'm going to talk about all three of those at once. So I know some companies that only have one person responsible for completing the cost volume for their company and also completing the pricing of the RFP. So if you have the issue where this company has is that, the one person that's dealing with the cost volume might read language a certain way and maybe misunderstand the way the cost volume is supposed to be. And if you have a different set of eyes or more than one set of eyes on the actual cost volume, you could both or all come up to a conclusion that yes, that's what they're stating. Same thing with having one person responsible for a cost volume or pricing. A major risk in this is obviously haste. Sometimes there could be 2 or 3 proposals going on at once, and if you have one person dealing with this, they're going to, at some point, try to rush to get the pricing done or the cost volume done. And kind of that leads into the last one, which is deception. And in proposal review or final proposal review, some questions could be asked about, hey, is this exactly the way it's supposed to be, or did you factor this into pricing, or whatever the variable is, and having that one person just answer yes, I made sure that that's in there, or I took in consideration that particular factor. There's where the deception comes into play. And then obviously having poor cost estimating and pricing practices could affect basically your win rate. So in this slide, we'll show you the hourly rate buildup and taking a raw labor of an employee at $48 an hour, which is roughly $100,000 salary per year. And we're going to assume that the fringe is 32%, the overhead is 24%, and the G&A is 8%. Now it's basically telling you how to come up with a hourly rate to bill to the government. So if you take the $48 and you multiply the fringe, you come up with okay, I'm going to add in $15.38 on top of the $48. So then you take it, and by the way, the fringe overhead and G&A is just a standard indirect rates. You as a company might have multiple overhead rates, but for this exercise, we're just using 3 indirect rates. So then in adding the overhead, you add in the $48 plus the fringe of 15.38, and then you multiply that by 24 to give you an extra $15 to add on top of the raw labor and the fringe. And then for the final piece is G&A, so you're adding in the $48 plus the $15 of fringe plus the $15 of overhead, and then you're multiplying that by the sum of that by the 8% of G&A here. So it gives you an extra $6.29. So when you combine all those true costs, your total cost to keep the employee just employed within the company is $85 an hour. So it really went from the employee doesn't just cost the company $48 an hour. It really costs the company $85 an hour just to break even. So now you want to factor in fee, and this 10% obviously doesn't apply to cost plus, so we're just kind of using this as a T&M example. Then let's say you want to actually make money off of the employee, then you'll add in an extra 10% fee on top of the total cost of the employee, so it gives you an extra $8.50. So the total bill rate that you're billing the government is $93 and basically 50 cents. And instead of going through that whole exercise where you're breaking down fringe, you're breaking down overhead, you're breaking down G&A, there's a pretty simple way to come up with your wrap rate of your company so that you're able to do quick pricing estimates, do quick profit analysis on an employee, and do a quick, okay, do we want to bid this salary, do we want to bid that salary, that type of thing. So the calculation to come up with a wrap rate is just having a factor of 1 in front of, or 100 in front of each of your percentages. So calculation is 1.32 times 1.24 times 1.08 gives you a wrap rate of 1.76. So you can just take a total, so you can take any employee off of any hourly rate, and once you can figure out what your wrap rate is, you'll be able to automatically figure out and disclose how much that employee is actually costing you to keep, or how much you need to bill the government in order to break even or to make profit. And in today's government contracting arena, depending on the type of industry that you're in, for intel, security type work, 1.5. Anything lower than 1.5 is actually really good. So the range really is 1.5 to 1.8 is a pretty good range. 1.8 is probably stretching it out a little bit. But to be really competitive, try to stay within that range. So once you're able to come up with a wrap rate and you feel comfortable that in the forecasting and estimating tool that you have, you're able to comfortably put in your fringe, your overhead, and your G&A. And now you're basically ready to build up your matrix or a pricing matrix that you can flow through the different years, whether it be base year, option year 1, option year 2, and you're kind of able to take these prices, and now you're able to build up a price so that you can offer that to the government. So in this example, we're putting in a salary for some labor categories. So you'll see that there's a PM, application architect, InfoPath developer, web developer, business analyst, and we put in some salaries in there. We've broken out the hourly rate, which is basically 2080 hours. So it gives you a raw hourly rate. Then putting in fringe, loading in fringe, overhead and G&A, and a fee at 6%, it gives you a fully loaded rate that you can bill to the government and use as part of your in your pricing proposal. Now, you'll notice at the top left, I put in a escalation factor of 3.5%. So once you're able to figure out, okay, this is my fully loaded rate, I'm going to go ahead and build in that 3.5% for each of my option years that are available in the RFP. So with that, there are, and the companies that are actually managing cost-plus work already know what provisional rates are. So provisional rates are essentially forward pricing rates, if you want to, for lack of a better term, and in the fact that you're estimating out what your company will look like based on what's in the pipeline, what RFPs you're planning to go after, how many FTEs you're going to possibly have on board within the next year, and any other expenses associated with that type of increase in employees. So your fringe costs will obviously increase. Some of your overhead costs may increase. You might be going after a 50-person job, and you'll need a new office. So you'll need new office space. So you have to factor in new office space. So when it's all said and done, and you've compiled all that information together on spreadsheets or whatever forecasting or estimating tool you use, you could essentially come up with a pretty close figure of what your company will look like during and at the end of the year of the next year. So when you develop these provisional rates, one, it increases your base of your indirect rates. So anytime you increase your base of your indirect rates, that brings your rates down. The further that you can bring your rates down, it makes you much more competitive when going after RFPs. That's the whole kind of name of the game is, okay, how competitive can I be without losing my shirt? And once you're awarded the contract, then ensuring that those costs based on the provisional rate budget that you've supplied and created, now you not only do you have provisional rates that you can submit to the government, but you also basically have a budget, right? And since you're factoring all the indirect costs and all the other employees that you're going to have within the next year, you also have your existing employees in there as part of the base as well. So there's two advantages of developing a provisional rate. One, it gives you experience in doing that and experience in forecasting out and estimating, but it also provides you a straightforward budget. You know that, okay, if I go over this amount, it's going to increase my fringe rate, for instance. And if it increases my fringe rate, then I'm going to lose profit. I mean, that's the real, that's why profit margins on cost-plus fixed-fee jobs are so small that any fluctuation above what you've proposed or what you use as provisional rates really eats into that particular profit margin. And since it's only between 2 to 8%, anything above your indirect rates that you propose really could hurt the company. Okay, so that's why it's very important to really monitor and control your costs. So these provisional rates are both utilized for, again, pricing and billing. So when you have established provisional rates, you're going to be using those provisional rates to bill the government because you're going to be sending DCA a letter or a package saying these are the rates that I'm going to use for the next upcoming year for both my RFPs and my billing. The provisional rates must be reconciled at year end to your actual rates when you close out cost-plus jobs. So they're called provisional rate billings for lack of better terms. And what that really does is that, okay, at the end of the contract, you basically need to marry up your provisional rates and your actual rates to see what the differences are, whether it's an overrun or an underrun. Again, it's audited by DCA. So the provisional rates are used as a guideline for DCA to come in when they audit your books. When they audit your books, they're gonna take a look at your provisional rates, and then they're gonna take a look at your actual rates to see what the variances are. And if they're pretty in line, then you're pretty good to go. For in areas where it completely exceeds what you proposed, you could end up like a bearing point where DCA will come in and tell you what the rates need to be. So again, it's very important that you monitor your costs. And then any change must be supported by data regarding actual running rate experience. So that may start a series of questions by DCA, again, if rates are overrun. And then here's another example of provisional rates. So you'll see on the left-hand side, using the same type of salary, this is where your actuals come into play, and then what the advantage of having a provisional rate on the right-hand side. And again, this is a pricing matrix that we saw earlier, but this just shows you an escalation factor of base period all the way through to option year 4. And the advantages of, again, of provisional rates is you're more competitive in pricing. You obviously have a better understanding and you have more advanced capabilities within the company in estimating and forecasting. You're able to compare actuals versus target rates now, now that you're able to develop provisional rates. And again, ability to monitor, control costs, and have the DCA interaction. And the last slide is best practices in the cost volume. Follow directions, and I'm not going to repeat all the rest of them, but cost volumes are very difficult to follow because not only do you have to fill out the technical side of the cost volume, but you have to fill out pricing. And so there are instructions in the cost volume, for instance, use only 8.5 by 11 for your pricing. Use a certain font size and a certain font type. And if you don't follow those directions, and you could have put up a really bang proposal, and any type of little nuance like that, they could just throw out the proposal altogether. So that's really the most important piece in your cost volume and your pricing. And that'll go ahead and do it for the presentation. I will go ahead and turn it back over to Brian Giblin, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Sean. We're going to be open up to your questions here in just a second. And so if you have a question, please start typing them into the question box. Very quickly, we're going to do one last poll. We'd like to understand your challenges as you see them. So as you're preparing your proposals for submission, what do you see as your biggest challenge or concern? I was thinking about making this a multi-answer poll, but I decided to go single. What is your biggest challenge? I'm going to force you, we all like, are you afraid of losing on price? This is, something where provisional rates can come in and help you. Are you concerned about managing the cash flow, especially if you got growth and you need to be investing in, as Sean was, oh, it is multiple? Oh, okay, so we changed it last minute. You can make multiple answers, despite it saying your biggest challenge. So tell me, which are your challenges? Which ones are impacting you the most as you prepare your pricing proposals? Your current infrastructure, if you all of a sudden start to grow significantly, how's that going to impact your ability to support those new hires? Do you have the accounting systems in place? Do you have the other infrastructure in place to support them? Also looking at being able to meet the contract requirements. If all of a sudden you want a cost-plus contract, would you be able to support that? Is that one of your concerns as you're putting together your proposal? And then, Sean was talking about the ability to have the right people at the prices that you proposed. Do you feel you have the recruiting and the ability to retain your quality employees? I heard Sean mention, what if your fringe rate came in at 20% and you had proposed 30? I think you might start losing a bunch of employees if all of a sudden your fringe rate dropped so dramatically. Take a look at those answer these. Multiple answers are possible here, so please answer, and we'll allow a few more seconds for us to get the polls in. If you've already answered the poll, please start typing questions into the question box. All right, I'm going to close the poll, and we're going to take a look at that results. Looks like your number one answer, what a surprise, losing on price. So that's something where, not surprising, especially in this day and age of lowest price technically acceptable. And that's where, working on those provisional rates and looking at them, what can you do? Because you don't want to, on the one hand, you don't want to lose on price, but then again, you don't want to win and lose money. So we understand that challenge there and that the two conflicting forces there as well. Interesting to see that the recruiting is such a high one. Yeah, I guess when you're losing on price, getting the talent you need, the quality people you need, but being able to afford them within the cost structure of the contract. Two really big challenges. All right, thanks for sharing that with us. And I'm going to get back to talking about some of the resources that we have available to you. First, some of the resources that are available to everyone. The government has some wonderful resources. In the purposes of time, and why don't we do this in our follow-up email? We're going to just put out, we're going to put all the links in there. So if you could go to the next slide. NeoSystems also has some resources. We have some blogs where we talk about these issues of provisional pricing, cash flow, all that. We'll put in some specific links in our follow-up emails. Eagle Ray, great case study where the CEO, Babs Darity, she was looking to grow her company, knew she wanted to use lots of different contract types so she could pursue as much business as possible. They're looking at growing to about 50 million this year. So good case study there. That'll be available to download. We'll put a link in to the follow-up email for that. Managing cash flow is our next upcoming webinar, and that'll be May 29th, so be looking for that link as well. The third in the series of GovCon Accounting 101, Understanding DCAA, that one's to be determined what date that'll be out, but look for that as well. We have classes, both online and in-person classes, so take a look and we'll see what's on the upcoming schedule for you there. And as always, if you have a question, you can just email to Grow Ahead, but you can also email to Sean and me as well. And so as we take out to your questions here, but if you have a question, if we don't get to your question, because some of them are kind of specific or we've run out of time, feel free to follow up with us individually. One of the questions we always get, is a copy of the presentation going to be available? We will have a recording of this presentation available. That as well will be a link in the follow-up email as well. Other questions up there? How are we looking there, Sean?
We've got one question. How is the fixed fee determined on a cost-plus fixed fee contract? Is it negotiated during the contract proposal or set by statute? In most RFPs, it will already tell you what the fixed fee is as far as the percentage. Now, also, what it'll also tell you is that if the fee can be on all costs or if it will be on actual hours of labor or on labor dollars. So that's, again, knowing the RFP requirements and reading the RFP and fixed fee, cost plus fixed fee jobs, it's pretty, it can be kind of wide range as far as where the fee is associated with.
Are there any justifications for that percentage in the fee? What would justify an 8% fee, or why would there be a 2% fee? Is there any rhyme or reason to that, or is it how would one go about? How does that get decided?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. It's again it's really just off the RFP. Sometimes Navy Seaport E could only be 4% fee, or maybe a 2% fee on the actual work itself, but then you could have 6% on the award fee if it's a cost plus award fee. So it really kind of makes up, you're essentially getting 8% fee, right?
Okay. All right, well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. We want to be sensitive to everybody's time. I see one or two questions which we'll do some individual follow-up on, but I want to thank everybody for their time today. I hope you found this useful as Sean took us through the risks and the benefits of the different contract types, as we looked at some of the ways that tips and best practices for pricing those. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. And again, on behalf of NeoSystems, thank you for joining us today.